America in 1957, and he sent me two Rodden Custom and a Custom Rodder. And in a Rodder Custom was a channel 32, very low, top chopped, heavily channeled. I thought, this is the car, rear view shot. Just over the hill here in this picture, this couple of young guys, and they had this 34 Chevy. And I came into the yard and they hacked the fenders off with the axe, and they just used it for crashing around the paddocks and things. And I thought, that's it, that's the coupe. So for about $30 I bought it and brought it home. Contacted the kid in Brooklyn, it was. I got this 34 Chevy. He said, oh no, it's full of wood, you can't handle, you can't weld wood, there's no use, channel. I said, you've got to get a Ford, get a 34 Ford. Well, there were no 3 windows here, so I went for the next best thing. Mr. Bentley he's got this 34 Ford, right down the back there's this 5 window there sitting there, Aussie one, and covered with dust, you couldn't even tell what colour it was. And he said, yeah, I'll get it out for you, come back next week. It was, I think he wanted $200 and it would have 12 months registration. So he had it all washed down, it was navy blue. So I thought, yeah, well, she's good. So I headed home, up over Mackenzie's Hill, flatness. Always got to see how fast they go back then. Anyway, big knock. Took it back to you next week. He says, oh, okay, I'll put another engine in for you. And we blew the top out of a piston in my exuberance. So I got tearing into it and I pulled all that padding and upholstery out. And lo and behold, the friggin' thing was full of wood too, just like the Chevy, as much wood as the Chevy. So I write to this guy back in Brooklyn, I said, what's going on? It's full of wood. He said, I don't believe it. I sent him the pictures. He said, it's full of wood. He said, there's something wrong with that car. It don't look the same. It looks the same here, but it's not the same there. So we figured out the Aussies did it a bit different. Well, in the end, I talked my father into letting me build a workshop onto one of the sheds with a concrete floor and a pit, and basically we did all the work there. Pete and I built them side by side, and we started about 1961, I think, or thereabouts. And by the time we went to America in '66, we were nearly done. You know, they were pretty well. Only needed another year, and they were on the road. First thing we wanted to get a bit lower at the back, so cut the metal out of the cross member, start boxing up some plate and tube, and then we had. I thought, we're never going to get U-bolts to get around all this, so then we plated them and we just sandwiched them between some, cut the backs off the chassis rails, had to be scissored off with the old acetylene torch, a gas axe. We put the split radius rods on and took the centre out of the cross member, put the 56 Ford, it's a 50, made the stick shift up, as you can see here, big 6 shift and sort of H pattern. Of course the selector's on the left hand side, but in the narrow car it was quite okay. The motor came from Kyneton down the road there. A fella was wrecking 56 Fords at the time, and they usually smashed ones, you know, because they weren't that old. They were about 4 years old. Yeah, I think we got the lot in one hit. Yeah, the rear end as well. It's a 56 Ford. And there's a fella in Ballarat, he specialised in wrecking 40s to 48 Fords. Swifty got his front end there and I got mine. And the valve covers, Reedy Thomas covers, which were made locally. Yeah, we reversed the rear wheels. There was a place in Melbourne that did them for us, or would cut them down. I think we had smaller ones on the front. I give it the same treatment in the front. The piece, cut the cross member out and boxed it up. Reversed the spring eyes to get it down in the front and put the reversed wheels with the 48 brake drums. We had the 13-inch wheels on the front, which Holdens and Falcons had at the time. We had to set them out a bit because they're running pretty close to the brake drums. The old generator, and the front mount was on the balance plate on the Y blocks in the custom lines. We scissored that up a little bit to make it work. And we bought this 28 Chrysler, it was, with the square firewalls. We cut that back, but we had to trim it back considerably, and we hadn't put the tube in. You can see straight through into the body, and it's basically the motor had been cleaned out, and all this had been painted in red oxide. Well, it was finished about 1967. That's about when it was registered then. Yeah, metal flake was the fashion at the time, so I got this American guy. He came out here and he said, oh yeah, I painted them. I'm a big custom painter in the States. I can paint that up pretty good. So he whips the pressure up about 200 psi, which apparently you don't use with metal flake. And I looked out across where the workshop was, It was like green fog coming out all the gaps around everywhere. And I thought this stuff's supposed to go on cars, not be drifting into the atmosphere. If you go up there today, like 50 years later, you can still find green metal flake in little nooks and crannies all over the place. At that particular time, in the 63 or 4, we'd never seen an edsel other than in a picture. And we just hung it on the wall. And then one day I said to Swifty, how does this look? And I just said it as a joke. I sat it in front, because we had the grill shell, but I sat it in front. And he said, well, it's different. I said, well, maybe we could put it in and we could... So we made a frame out of steel and tubes and chromed it all, so it sort of sat in properly inside the... I don't think it was very tasteful, but it was certainly different. We had chrome headers. I think in the end we ended up with a set of Thunderbird, because the Thunderbird and Ford truck had duals. Mm-hmm. We ended up making the tubular ones with the oil canister, which you could unscrew the end, and it took you about a minute to take the caps off. And yeah, you can see the cowl on it there, the extended cowl, and the body mould, we made it come through. The moulding on the cowl was done in Bondo because it seemed to be the easiest. We had Jeep headlights on the front, that took the 5-inch sealed beams. I didn't like the big ones. This was a piece of heavy pipe with the turn bullets in the end, the chrome front end and the bug catcher. That was a Cal Custom one we got when we were in the States in '66, which we thought looked the shot. Well, they were a trailer fender. They were rolled up in like one big section with a split through the middle, so we just cut them in two. And if you're going to have that sort of fender, I thought that's about as good as you could probably have it look. I decided to put a plexiglass or Perspex plastic top in, which was in a deep green. We had the white Norgahide type interior, which lit up like sort of give a green glow over everything. We had a chrome 54 Ford dashboard. Everything inside was chrome or white. Yeah, well, the back end's got your regular Chev sedan taillights, which are twins. It was a rumble seat. We converted that to work as a trunk, and that was lined, upholstered inside with a set of chrome tools on the Formica board. Yeah. The gas tank was inside. The filler was on the inside. I'd been on the road about a year at that point. And I think it's about the time I sold it, because I thought, heck, I should take it down the paddock and take some pictures before it goes, which I did. So that sort of explains, it's in custom rodder number 10, which was in November, December, last quarter of '69. Eventually we got the chance to buy the property across the creek. Well, here's the creek here, and the property across the creek's there. And we had to find $5,000 deposit. So the car had to go, and I think I ended up selling it for like $1,000. I got about half my money back. I think his name was Baxter. We met over at Daylesford about halfway to Melbourne, and he took it for a spin, and he said, yep, she'll do, and handed the money over. And it disappeared from my life nearly forever until more recent times when the boys sort of, one man had owned it for a number of years, and from that point on you probably know more about it than I do.
It's all because of the little books. Eddie had a pen friend in America and he was sending him little custom riders and that sort of thing. Yeah, we reckon couldn't afford, we were both like something like any of the big American cars, but you couldn't afford them. They were only for rich people in Australia, because most of them were private imports, or they brought in, but there's a company in Melbourne used to bring them in, but we were mad keen on American cars. Yep, that's the thing, we've got to build a hot rod. So, like I built this and Eddie built his 34 coupe. Right. Channel 34 coupe. So you had to do something that was bought that car out of the local bus lines, a complete driving 34 coupe, 5-window coupe. And he said, well, what are you going to build? And then I think it was March 61, Hot Rod magazine had Marty Holman's T-Bucket on the cover with Norm Grabowski's tour in the background. I said, that's what I'm going to build. So we just looked in magazines. Eddie and I just went through magazines and looked at what everybody'd done, and then, oh, well, that's the way you make your radius rods. And welded them up and filed them, and didn't have a grinder or anything. It was all file work, and, you know, Eddie had a electric welder, stick welder, and an oxy. And that was it. And the rest, like all the brackets, engine mounts and all that, everything was made from flat bar and marked and bent and welded and filed. And I think it's an odd one. It's an Australian T truck cowl. And we found that in the bush, out and dumped in the bush. And then the doors came out of a burnt out 27 T that was dumped in the bush in another spot. Then we went out the local wrecking yard out the road, had a Model A Tourer up on top of the pile down in the bottom corner, and we cut the back out of the Model A Tourer. Then we just tacked it all together in bits and pieces and stood back and got the gas axe out and trimmed a bit more off it until it looked right. And then channeled the hell out of it to try and get it, because it didn't like Marty Holman's, because you could run over a wombat without even tickling his ears. And originally it was set up with a flathead, had a 48 flathead in it, and then saw the Dodge advertised in the paper, so we drove down to Melbourne, never ever heard it run. Local machine shop made an adapter to adapt it to 39 box, so everything from the box back was left the same, and just the Dodge was sort of jammed in there. When we went to the States in '66, Phil Wine gave each one of us, before we came home, a single 4-barrel manifold, and he gave me a single 4-barrel for the 318. So I sold this, I advertised it in Custom Rodder magazine. I sold the whole lot for $160. 2003, Geelong Nats. I had the car down there, and there was a guy standing in the car, and I came along, and he said, didn't you used to have a tri-power on this? I said, yeah. I said, I did. I wish I still had it. I said, you don't know where I can get one? He said, I got one. You interested in selling it? Anyway, I went and bought it home. I'm out in the shed looking at it and cleaned it up. I said, raced inside to the missus. I said, I just bought my old tri-power back, because I'd cut the front off it. You can see where it's cut here. Oh, yeah. Because originally I cut that off with a hacksaw, because the water pump, it was a truck water pump, and I had to cut that off to clear the water pump. So sold it for $160 and paid $600 to get it back. Some 35 odd years later. The local guy did the diamond tufted upholstery. That was painted with a vacuum cleaner using enamel paint. If you put enough thinner in it, you could actually spray it. And Eddie painted that with the vacuum cleaner, and that striping is all his original striping. And we heard about the Melbourne Hot Rod Show, so we sort of did a mad rush over Christmas, because that's on same weekend as the GNRS, last weekend in January. So that was sort of a rush job that Eddie did, and it's stayed that way since 1965. 48 front end, I bought it from the wrecker. Mick Kennedy was a wrecker in Ballarat that wrecked a lot of Fords. The rear end was 40 Ford rear end. It came from Mick also, and the original flathead even came from him. We wanted to sort of increase the wheelbase, and we'd run out of Model A rail. So the easiest way was to hang the spring behind the axle and suicide front end, and that with a suicide front end, of course, you can get it down nice and low. They're the original tyres I bought in about 1963. There was a company in Melbourne called Akron Tyre Company, and they're, well, virtually 50 years old. Wheels were original 16s, which were cut down. They're cut down to 13 inch on the front and 14 inch on the rear. The Baby Moons were, I think they cost me about $1 each back about 1963 from the wheel company. Didn't really like using the Smith stuff, but it was all that was available here really. It was a bit hard to get the Stuart Warner stuff. And even VDO, I think at the time VDO were fairly new in Australia. There's a a guy lived next to Eddie that used to come and, by the name of Dave Barclay, used to come over and see what we're up to in the shed. I was looking around for a shift knob for it, and he volunteered one off the wood-burning stove in the kitchen. It's not a common thing, but it does happen a bit in Australia. You'll see them used as shifters. Yeah, I think I found the tank in the wrecking yard, and I think it came out of a Dodge truck and had been shortened there. So then we found another one, and Eddie brazed the two together. So that's why I had to have the straps there to cover up the join line.
Right.
Very difficult with only very light gauge steel. Took me about 3 years to sort of get it all together. Mm-hmm. A lot of credit for this car goes to Eddie, because we built the car really together. It wasn't just my own. It was a combination of the two of us. We'd work on this car, we'd work on Eddie's 34 coupe. We sort of worked together.
A friend of Eddie's took me out to where they were building the little bucket and Eddie's 34 coupe, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a hot rod. And I went out there and it just blew my mind. I could not believe what I was seeing, and that's where I started my interest in hot rods, was from this little bucket and Eddie's 34 coupe.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. He really fell hard.
Well, I saw it advertised and I was interested in 34 to 30 and 32 Fords. I just went to have a look at it and I thought it'd be a nice project. The engine wasn't even in the car, and I had it delivered out the front there, a couple of $1,000. And it's been in my garage ever since. Steve Blatt, he bought the car, but I don't think he did anything to it, and then he on-sold it to another guy who removed the motor, and he said something was wrong with the clutch or something, so he pulled the motor out and had it sitting there on the floor when he arrived, because he owed Steve Blatt money for the car. Mm-hmm. So Steve went and repossessed it, and then he sold it to me. That's all we did, was put the motor and tranny back in it, and that's it. That's as it was.
Okay.
It hasn't been changed or worked on or anything. I wanted to get it on the road and join a club and do some miles in it, have some fun.
So what happened?
I don't know. I had to build a shed for it. That cost me a bit of money. I hadn't been married long, and then I got a 38 sloper Chev and a few other projects, and I was just very, very busy, and I just put it on the back burner.
How long has it been on the back burner?
37 years. The day I brought it home, my wife was going to divorce me. She just saw it as an old bomb with no future. Yeah. But I think it's grown on her. Yeah. You know, when I bought the car, I didn't know its history, but when I found out through friends telling me that it looked a lot like a car in one of Eddie's first custom rodders, when he did a story on the car, he said he painted it Kelly green metal flake, and it was in the 1968 Melbourne Hot Rod Show. Well, funny enough, when I opened the doors and checked it out, green paint is there where it's worn through, so I knew it probably was that car. But until I spoke to Eddie about it, I wasn't sure. Paid Eddie a visit up at his museum and out on the farm, and he opened up all the sheds for us, which he really rarely does. I just happened to mention to him when we'd been there a while, I said, Eddie, do you ever remember where your old hot rod went, the one you first built up here out on the farm at Muckleford, and he says, no, I've lost track of it. And I said, well, it's in my garage, mate. And I think he was very surprised. He was very quiet, he didn't say much. I think he'd like to see it running again and driving. And he'd surely jump in and have a drive. Oh, well, they cut the guards off that Eddie had on it, which were higher up near the rear deck. They've put just flat steel guards on it, but there's not enough clearance above the tyres, and it doesn't look as good as what it did when Eddie built it. They've raised the body, and they haven't lined up the body properly, and the shocker mounts are different. It hasn't got any travelling suspension at the rear. It needs to have the body off and have all the work done to bring it back to what it should be. I don't know who painted it blue. It must have been the owner before Steve had it. I'd like to get it running first, and then work on the suspension and the steering, and then decide whether I'm going to channel it again. He must have spent a lot of time putting that together.
Yeah.
All the thought that went into it, and the hard work. You must have been motivated.
Yeah. And you did the flames too.
Oh yeah, that was my first attempt at flames. Well, for a kid who was about 17 at the time, it's better flames than I've seen on some cars today. Some flames look like bloody shark's fins.